need all that? That's not testable material. Who cares about that stuff? So I did put it up, right? Noah, did you see the video go up?
I don't watch the videos, like,
You don't need to, because you're here.
yeah, but I don't.
Did you guys get the 5 ISs? No? I think I put it up as soon as I went to my office yesterday. Who watched the latest video? That explains it, yeah. So there'll be, we're gonna be quizzes coming up, very quickly and rapid fire, okay? Do we have a senior in this class? Not in this particular one, no? Okay, it's not a big deal. We're in no hurry for you guys, because your final, I think grade's gotta be due for seniors earlier than others. That's most people in my intro classes are not seniors, so not a big deal. All right, so let's get to where we were. We're in metaphysics. For metaphysics, we need to ask certain questions, right? What does it mean to exist, right? I gave you an example or a statement of what it means to exist, and that's to exemplify one or more properties. That should make sense. And what are properties? I gave you, we could use the words, different words for properties, right? Descriptors or whatnot. And so, if I said the white wall, I say the wall is white. What is the property of the wall? Whiteness. Okay. What are some other properties of walls? Extension, right? Height. Maybe if I wanted to put it on a scale, we'd determine that the wall has a weight to it, right? Put it on a scale. So all of these predicates, that's another word we would use for properties, things to describe the object. And then we have relations, okay? We have the taller than, shorter than, the before than, the after than, the over, a lot of prepositions in there, right? And so those are relations. If A is taller than B and B is taller than C, then A is taller than C. We're all talking relations there, right? A can't be taller than B if B doesn't exist, or if they don't exist, correct? So if something exemplifies a property, we know it exists. We could say it exists. Outer space, a lot of people say, well, nothing exists out there. The space is nothingness. No, space is something. Space exemplifies the property being extended, all right? Now, all of this is a big deal because of the types of questions we're going to ask. We asked some very interesting questions last week about sexuality. What does it mean to be, or gender? What does it mean to be male or female? Can I be a non-male? Can a male be a non-male? What are the predicates of maleness, right? And we talked about accidental versus essential predicates. Accidental predicates are things that if you lose it, you're the same thing. If I lose my hair, I'm still who I am, right? An essential predicate is something that if you lose it, you lose whatever that thing is, all right? Now, we left off without discussing the modal distinction. Now, by the way, if you have not watched that video, I can guarantee it was dense, and I can guarantee it is dense with a lot of test questions on it. Okay, so keep in mind all of our quizzes, are quizzes for one, but then there's the final. You want to understand that you need to know these questions so that you could pass. That's a practical sense of it. In the short term, you want to pass the class. In the long term, you want to know this stuff because you'll be better thinkers. This is the stuff I'm talking about. I talk about Augustine, which is great, and will help you be a better thinker for sure. You talk about directing your loves appropriately and all that. Talk about Aquinas. Talk about the 5 proofs for God's existence. Absolutely important, right? But these are like little mechanisms for how to think. Okay, and I want you guys to pay attention to them because this is solid stuff. Okay, So watch that, the most recent video. Of course, watch them all. And remember, the quizzes are open video, so you can just pop them open. I know you're doing it if you know, which I don't care, because that's how you learn, right? Okay, so anyway, some of you apparently don't do it that well, though. You gotta go through and watch the whole things. All right, so let's get back here. I want to talk about two distinctions right now. We talked about last week the 5 is's, or the other day we talked about the type token distinction. We did talk about that, correct? Yes, we did, because I talked about books versus the ideas. Today I want to talk about the modal distinction and the real distinction. Now, as you write that down, before you get there or right under that, I would like you to, we want to write a couple other words. One, Meriology, M-E-R-E, ology. It's actually M-E-R-I, ology, O-L-O-G-Y. Meriology. And let's write another word, elanguescence, E-L-A-N-guescence, G-U-E, sense, C-E-S-C-E-N-C. Let me write that out. Chalk here. I'll write it out for you so I can misspell it along with you. Okay, so yeah. Meriology, I think it's C there. No, it's definitely no. E. Meriology, apologize for your professor being a horrible speller. And elanguescence. That's a G. U-E-S-C-E-N-C-E. Elanguescence. Okay. Meriology is the study of part-whole relations. This is going to be important. Meriology's part-whole relations. We're going to talk about that in short order. And then elanguescence is the coming and going out of existence. The coming and going out of existence. Now, why do I care about that? I want to know if something can half exist. Can something half exist? Now, why is this important? Can humanity half exist? Can life half exist? Are these degreed properties? Like, is existence degreed? It's 70% exists. Can you have a sandwich that half exists? You can have a half sandwich that fully exists, right? But you cannot have a sandwich that half exists. Now, what about humanity? Does humanity half exist? Can a woman be pregnant with something that is has humanity as half existing? See this? You see where this is going to apply towards ethics, the ethics of abortion. What about the ethics of euthanasia? Like, my dad was alive and he had cognitive decline, and then when he was getting sick, he had COVID. They treated him like, yeah, it really didn't matter anyway. Why? Well, because there's this weird assumption that their humanity doesn't exist as much as it did while they were cognitively present. Is that true? Nobody's answering. Some of y'all are going to be nurses and doctors and all that stuff, and then you're going to go treat patients, and how are you going to treat them? How should we treat humans? Should we treat humans with dignity? And then when they get sick, you treat them differently because they're no longer as human as they were before? As though humanity is degreed, a property that comes and goes? So So these become important. Mereology, study of part-whole relations. We're going to talk about that, okay? Because that's going to be important after we get through with these two distinctions. Because we're asking the question, what does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be human? And then what does it mean to be me? Obviously, you go human than me, okay? The I, the ego, the ego, right? So let's start with the modal distinction, and then we'll go with the real distinction. I think we need to talk about necessary versus contingency today. We make distinctions. We want to know how something is different than something else, and how they are the same. The 5 is when you have the is of identity, okay? The is of identity. That's important. That's why you need to go back and watch the previous lecture, because it's kind of like you don't want to miss the previous step in algebra. Same way with philosophy. You don't want to miss something that's necessary to what we're talking about today. So in distinctions, we want to know how they are different and how things are the same, and that's a big deal. Okay, what does it mean for something to be the same, and what does it mean for it to be different? Okay, a modal distinction says this: if A can exist without B, but B cannot exist without A, it's a modal distinction. If A could exist without B, I'd write that down unless you're planning on listening to lectures for the rest of your life. If A could exist without B, but, and the key word is but, B cannot exist without A, that's a modal distinction. There's a difference there, but one is dependent upon the other. If A can exist without B, but B cannot exist without A, then they are modally distinct. All right? So the sun could exist without the sunlight or the sun rays, right? Whatever that body is that produces those rays of light will eventually stop producing those rays of light, but it will exist, right? Stars will age, become red giants, eventually burn out. The body still exists. All of its energy is gone, and the sunlight, the rays, will no longer be emitted. So the sun rays are distinct from the sun, but they are dependent upon the sun. Okay, they are modally distinct. So the sun can exist without the rays, but the rays cannot exist without the sun. Okay, make sense? The sun's rays, that is. Nothing weird about that, correct? Okay, let's go back to mereology, part-whole relations. Let's put some rocks on the ground, or we could call this laundry, or whatever the parts are, right? And we start putting rocks, and we start putting whatever. And what do we get from this once we put a bunch of rocks together?
Like a building.
A pile. In this case, a pile. It's a big pile. Okay? But yeah, you could put, you could perfectly do that. And we will do that with engine parts or bricks, right? Good, you're on the right track, of course. I could have just as easily said a building. In this case, I just said pile. Okay, you just put a bunch of rocks and you get a pile. All right, can the rocks exist without the pile? Yeah, right. Can the pile exist without the rocks? No. So it is modally distinct. So the rocks are not identical to the pile. They're distinct from the pile, but it is a modal distinction. All right? The rocks cannot exist without the pile, but the rocks can exist without the pile, but the pile cannot exist without the rocks. All right? It's modally distinct. They are different, but one is dependent upon the other. A car engine would be the same. The parts can exist without the engine, but the engine cannot exist without the parts. There comes a point in time when you take enough parts away, you no longer have an engine. Okay? Where that is, I don't know. I take a spark plug off, do I have an engine anymore? It certainly isn't functioning anymore. I don't have the function of an engine. Okay? Now that's going to be different from a real distinction. A real distinction is going to say something like this. A can exist without B, and B can exist without A. A can exist without B, and B can exist without A. Why is that important at all? Well, first of all, let's just say I've got a remote here, and there are batteries in this remote. The batteries in the remote are distinct, okay? Is it a real distinction? Can the batteries exist without the remote control? The answer is yes. You're all going, yeah, sure, the batteries can exist without the remote control. If I take the batteries out, does the remote control cease to exist? No, it does not. So the remote control can exist without the batteries. So A can exist without B, right? And, the key word is and, B can exist without A. The remote can exist without the batteries, and the batteries can exist without the remote control. That makes it a real distinction. That tells us that they are two separate things that have independent existence. Independent. There's no dependency on the remote control of the batteries or vice versa. They exist independently. Okay. Why is this important? Because in metaphysics, one of the questions we're trying to ask is, what am I? Do I exist? Do I exist? And if I exist, what am I? What type of thing am I? Going back to our original options of the world, of what exists in the world, and we ask what types of things exist, there's all physical, all non-physical, or a combination of both. Is the world only a physical thing, made up of only physical parts and wholes? Is the world, everything that exists, that is, only non-physical? Right? All ideas. We call that what? You remember? You have naturalism, realism, and idealism having to do with those. Okay? And then finally, you have realism, which believes that there's both physical and non-physical reality. Okay? Now the question is, what am I? Am I only physical? If I'm a naturalist, what do naturalists believe? Naturalists believe that everything that exists is physical. And if everything is physical and I exist, then I too must be physical and only physical, because there is nothing that is not physical according to the naturalist. That's my only option, if naturalism is true. If idealism is true, then my body is an illusion, so to speak. It is an idea, but it is not a physical thing. Right? There's no physical object that contains the properties that I experience of solidity and shape and color and texture, and in my case, cold right now because for some reason our office building is super cold. On the other hand, if realism is true, that there are physical and non-physical parts of the world that exist, I don't mean Earth, I mean all of existence, then it is possible that I am more than just a physical thing. Okay, now I defended the other day, and probably the lecture before that, the existence of non-physical reality. And I think I did so in a pretty robust way. Would you say so, Noah?
Yeah.
Noah would say so, and if Noah says so, then it is so. At least in this case. So what are you? What do you mean by the word I, me, myself? Right? And of course you guys are going, some of you ladies and some of the boys are going, a name, I call myself, right? Far, a long, long way to run. From, what was that show again? Yeah, I was waiting for the boys to say, see anything. Seeing if the guys know it. Well, of course, those are names I call myself, whatever that thing is. Those are just words and sounds that refer to an object, and I want to know what object that is. What is the thing that I could refer to by use of the word me, myself, and I? Or when I'm speaking to an other, I would call them you, or them, or they. What is it? What is the thing? Is it physical or non-physical? Does anybody have an answer?
Repeat that, please.
To what am I referring when I use those words like you, or me, or myself, or I? Like if I take a psychology class, and in psychology, right, we're talking about study of the what?
Mind.
Sure, Noah says mind, but the Greek word psyche, from which we get psychology, means what? Soul. Interesting. Why would we change it from soul to mind, guys and gals?
Some people believe you don't have soul.
Well, first of all, say that one more time.
Certain people believe that we don't have souls.
So some people don't believe we have souls. What is it about a soul that is so offensive?
It's non-physical.
I saw a finger going up. People, it seems to be religious, doesn't it? Kind of has a kind of religious connotation, right? I mean, well, what if I told you you don't have a mind either? I mean, if you're a naturalist, what do you mean by the word mind? M-I-N-D.
Like the brain.
The brain, right? I mean, that's as close as you're going to get to that. So let's write this out here. If I can find my chalk. We're going to talk about, and this is where we're going with this. Is this all in camera right here?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So if we're talking about the mind, there's a whole, and this is kind of where I'm leading us, discipline in metaphysics having to do with the existence of reality, which, by the way, when I took my master's in philosophy, we did, one of my classes was metaphysics. Just had a whole class on metaphysics, okay? Then after that, I had a whole class on philosophy of mind, okay? And a whole class on consciousness, okay? I had a class on epistemology. Then I had a class on philosophy of science. And I had a class on religious epistemology. Remember, what does epistemology mean? Knowledge. See, we had one on scientific knowledge. We had one on religious knowledge, right? And then we had other special topics in, epistemology or metaphysics, okay? Philosophy of religion, which we'll talk about here in the coming weeks. So when you get into philosophy, I'm going to teach a class on political philosophy as well. So philosophy isn't just philosophy, like intro to philosophy. You're talking about philosophy of science. What does it mean to be science? What does it mean to be religion? What does it mean to be knowledge? That's epistemology. What does it mean to have religious knowledge? What does it mean to have scientific knowledge? What does it mean to have, in this case, we're asking the question, what is the mind? This is that question where I ask, what are you? Okay, because we're going to assume that your locus of identity is either something that has a mind or is a mind. You are a soul, perhaps, that has a mind, and so I'm going to use the word mind and soul. Mind and soul kind of synonymously, all right? Now there's a field of study that's also called philosophy of psychology, which will probably ask the question, what is the field of psychology study? And under that, you probably have some what are called second order questions about the nature of psychology. A second order question is a question about a question, okay? It's kind of like, 2 plus 2 is 4, right? Where what is the answer to 2 plus 2, right? And that's 4. You go, well, what does it mean to be math? Would be a second order question, okay? We'd be discussing that, all right. All right, so what are the faculties of the mind? First of all, if you go to a psychology class, they're going to go, well, the mind, it's the ego, and the super ego, and the id, right? The ID, the ego, and the super ego, the ego. Well, that's all fine and well, Freud, but the word ego, is nothing more than the Greek word for I. So you didn't do anything extraordinary by just using the Greek word for I and then adding super I to that, okay? What does that mean? What is contained within them? And then you go, what are those things, okay? Or what contains those things that make, what are you? Is it just a brain, a function? We're going to deal with that, okay? We're going to ask the options of this. What are you? Now we're going to use some of these things here, and I haven't got the necessary contingent yet, okay? But we're going to use some of these things so that we can determine that. I use all these to set up this kind of question. So let's just give you a few of what goes on with the mind. We got the intellect. And by the way, this can be broken up into different ways, in a way, like so Aristotle or Aquinas would probably do a little differently than I am, okay? If they were here, I'd probably be listening to them rather than talking myself, because I, stand on their shoulders. The intellect, that's, propositional knowledge and beliefs, right? Propositions are statements that are true or false. I am here as a proposition. I have knowledge of that. I believe it. It's true, okay? Truth of it isn't dependent upon my belief, but I believe because it's true. That's all contained in my intellect, my cognitive abilities, my ability to recognize true propositions and to reason properly. That all sounds like it belongs there, does it not? And that's one of the faculties of the mind. Faculties, I'd use that term. If I were asking you a question, what are some of the faculties of the mind? Use that, make sure you have that terminology written down. So you're like, what's this thing called faculty? It's what the mind does, okay? The will, otherwise known as volition. Volition, the will to do something. Free agency. Here's a question of whether or not you have it or not. If I drop this chalk, I cannot blame the chalk for falling, right? Because the chalk's not blameworthy. It is not responsible. In other words, what does the word responsible mean? Able to respond. The chalk has no ability to respond, nor does it have a desire to respond because it has no mind. One of the faculties of the mind is the will. The desire to move or not move towards or away from something. And I don't mean that necessarily physically move towards or away. It could be the desire to move towards a belief or non-belief, okay? Some have the will to believe one thing even if the evidence points another way. Some people have the will to do something even if they can't do it, such as I have the will. No, let's go with somebody, a paralytic who can't walk. They may have the will to walk, but they cannot. Okay, they're not able to respond. So, but just because, but if you have no will, you're also not able to respond. Okay? So, do you have free will? Now, that all depends on certain things. Like, I mean, for example, if, again, going all the way back to the original questions of metaphysics about what exists, if everything is physical, free will is not a part of the physical world. This physical object does not have a choice in anything. If A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then A is identical to C. It's called reduction, okay? So if A, let's say the machine is identical to the parts of the machine, and the parts of the machine are identical to, say, the atoms that make it up, right? The subatomic particles, or the atoms and the subatomic particles that make that up. Well, then A is identical to those parts. If A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then A is identical to C. Does your computer have free will? They talk a lot about artificial intelligence. Well, no, it's just a bunch of wires, circuit boards, electricity going through on-off switches. It follows the program. It can do no other. It makes no choices. The computer's made up of parts. Those parts are made up of other parts. Smaller and smaller until we get the atoms that make them up. The computer is nothing more than the big pieces, like the pile of rocks in a complex, put together in a complex manner, that result in certain outputs. The computer does not have free will. If naturalism is true, and we are nothing but physical beings because physical things are all that exists, if that is true, then we are nothing more than a complex system, a brain, which is made up of something else, which in turn is made up of something else, then our self is whatever those little parts are. And those little parts do not have free will. And if those little parts do not have free will, then neither do you. That means you are determined. There is no moral culpability. Cannot sit there and go on your high horse and say, well, you shouldn't have done that. Because to say shouldn't implies couldn't. Right? Now, of course, those things will be said and done, because if you have no free will, you'd be doing it anyway. Because you could do no other. Right? You have no choice. If you do have free will, then it shows that naturalism is false. Because naturalism necessitates there be a lack of free will. But if there is free will, well, then naturalism is false. I argue that there is free will, therefore naturalism is false. I look for the time. Emotions. Not going to name all of them. I'll name some of them. Joy, say fear, sadness, despair. Despair is the lack of hope. Okay? Robert C. Roberts, my old professor for the class in my doctorate work, took a class on philosophy of emotions. So you can see again, we go from metaphysics to philosophy of mind. I take a class in consciousness, all the masters, although they go on to PhD, where we take classes on a whole course on the philosophy of emotions, not the psychology of emotions, the philosophy of emotions, which asks the questions, what are emotions? In short, Robert C. Roberts writes calls emotions concern-based construals. So they are construals of something that are concern-based. Now I won't test you on that. We can. But, so joy, I'll construe a situation and I'll have a concern about it in a certain way that responds, gives me some sort of effect, I suppose. He's a very good writer. I enjoyed reading his work. Nice guy too. And anyway, good guy, Baylor. He's probably retired by now. He wasn't the youngest guy when I was there, for certain. And let's talk about appetites. We have appetites for food and water, for comfort, safety, and sex and procreation. All right? They're clearly appetites, not all are equal. Some give you a drive more than others. Some are necessary for survival, and others are not. Some give you the sense that if you can't, that you would die without it, but I can assure you, you will not. One of the biggest problems with the mind, and this is what we deal with as philosophers, is we're trying to get you to use your intellect to determine, guide your will, rather than your emotions and your appetites. Okay? All too often, our appetites will guide our will. Okay, we can see, that a lot of people, let's say, can carry a lot of extra poundage because they've allowed their appetite for food to guide their will to determine what they do, right? Even if it is less than healthy. And their appetite is greater than their intellect. Others have substance abuse problems. All right? And they become addicted to substances. And once they become addicted to substances, we see what the difference between animals and humans is our ability to use our reason to dictate our will. Animals use their appetites to dictate their will. So animals will often eat and not think about how, fat they're going to get. My poor dog, I got to take him out and run him for now on. Are we running out of time? How much time we got in class?
30.
5 minutes, good. So I gotta go be because I have the intellect, I have to direct his will. Okay, get his butt out running now. We used to run our dog a lot, and as time went on and we had kids, couldn't run him as much, but he still loved to eat and he put on some pounds. Now I gotta take him out and exercise him. And cut his weight. Because he's not gonna do it. There are people out there's a whole industry of porn where people are addicted to sexual content now. And they've allowed their appetite for sex and content to dictate and run their lives. There's a YouTube website that I found called The New Drug, okay? And it's discussing how porn is really ruining the lives of people. It's definitely ruined countless marriages by now. I can guarantee that. And I can also guarantee that anybody who's suffered sexual abuse has also been suffered it at the hands of somebody who is probably also a porn addict. I'm not saying porn addiction will necessarily lead to sexual abuse, but I can almost guarantee that sexual abuse is made more likely, okay, from those who do have a sexual addiction, okay? All right. Appetite, discomfort, and safety can lead to laziness for sure. sometimes can't get people off the darn couch, right? Won't do their homework. It's too comfortable. Emotions, fear, sadness, anger. There are a lot of people who will allow their decisions to be made. Their will be overcome to be a nice, good person by their anger, and they'll beat people up, hit people. There's plenty of abusive families where the person is, people are ruled by their emotions, and they're governed by them. They're not governed by their intellect. I have somebody particularly in mind when I think about how their mind is ruled by their emotions. They cannot actually be reasonable. They cannot be rational. And you go, where on earth you get that? So if you ever hear me correct you when you say, well, I feel this, I go, no, I don't want you to feel that. I want you to think that. I want you to think, not feel. Feeling is good. It should inform us of certain things. Like anger could inform me, or it is an appropriate response to something I know intellectually is wrong, morally. Thus, I could get angry about it, which will motivate me and get my will moving so that I go do something about it, or that I feel sad and I feel compassion for somebody and it affects my will, so I get up and I comfort them. Right? But just because I feel sad for somebody does not make them right. I feel sad that somebody's over in the corner puking and hurting physically, but that does not mean I should go give them drugs. Right? Which will further hurt them. Or accept their behavior, which is further destruction. Just because I like them, I have a feeling of niceness towards them, right? I need to think through things and ask the question, even though I feel love for somebody, does that mean I have to accept their behavior? No, that is unreasonable. And that's why philosophers want you to think and let your intellect rule your will, not your emotions, your appetite. These are the faculties of the mind. That's what the mind does. Next time I speak, which some of you will not be here, I will be talking about what the mind is, not does. Those are the faculties, what it does, not is. We want to know what it is, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. So with that, I'll let you go for the day. All right?